Hello, everyone, and welcome to Passive House Accelerator Live, where we explore how to slash the greenhouse gas emissions from our buildings and make them more resilient to the impacts of climate change. I'm Zach Semke, director of the Accelerator, and I am so excited to welcome Bev Craig, Beth Campbell, and Alexander Gardmurray for this special episode of Passive House Accelerator Live. It's entitled Massive Learnings from Massachusetts Multifamily, Practical Takeaways and Cost Reduction from over 20 certified projects. I got a chance to see a version of this presentation at PhiusCon and was really blown away by the work that Bev and Beth and Alexander are doing. This is a really critical moment in the Passive House movement, and there's a lot of excitement around the developments happening in Massachusetts in particular, and this real serious step jump that's happening with passive house adoption, thanks to some really great policy making progress, as well as a ground kind of foundation of work that practitioners have made already there. And so it's so important that this groundswell and this jump step is successful. And so it is really exciting to have people like Beth and Alexander at the helm of Passive House Massachusetts. Beth leads up their educational programming, and Alexander is their director. I am actually stealing a little bit, I think, from Bev right now, because Bev is going to be introducing them. So with that, I will introduce or hand it off to Bev of Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. Bev, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. And yeah, nice job, Zach. Beth and Alexander are the best. If you have not met them yet, you need to go introduce yourself, because they are so incredibly knowledgeable and thought leaders in passive building. So we today are going to be talking about some really exciting things. So you may have heard, Beth, do you mind going to the next slide? That passive building is just taking off in Massachusetts. So just to give you a perspective, it's sort of like an iceberg, right? We have over 2,000 certified units, mostly in multifamily buildings. We have over 5,000 that are design certified. So those are probably mostly under construction at this point. We have 8,000 that people have actually paid for registration, so they're pretty serious. And then when we take a look at who's taking advantage of our utility incentives and has done environmental reviews, we're talking about another 21,000 coming. So 30,000 units in the next couple of years we're going to be seeing in Massachusetts. So this is a really exciting thing. It's also perhaps a little scary in some ways, because think of how many new teams there are, right, that are entering this space. And that's exciting, but it also means that we need to teach them how to jump over the hard parts and to get educated very quickly. So next slide.
Great.
So I'm going to hand it off to Beth Campbell. Mass EC provided a grant to Passive House Mass to look into how to transition people quickly into knowing what they're doing. I'll hand it to you, Beth.
Awesome, Bevy. Thank you so much for that, and great to see everybody here today. I'm going to be doing the lion's share of this presentation. I'm going to be discussing the results of a set of interviews we did with Massachusetts professionals. They helped us understand the Passive House project development and delivery process more thoroughly, and what's happening right now in Massachusetts. So keep in mind that each bullet point that we talk about on the following slides represents hard-won lessons, real money that projects had to spend to learn these lessons. And all of these lessons learned and best practices impact cost and schedule. So it is, of course, up to you, the practitioner, to determine whether it's going to be a positive or a negative impact to your cost and schedule. So we spoke with more than 40 professionals. They were architects, GCs, developers. We talked to engineers, CPHCs, CPHDs, project verifiers. They represent over 130 distinct passive house projects that were registered, design certified, or certified. And so 20 of those had achieved final certification at the time of this report, which was just a couple months ago. And these interviews have formed the basis of the information in this presentation and the basis for this report. There's a reason why team values comes before all of the other lessons learned. We must bring not only the right knowledge, but the right mindset to passive building. First is a can-do attitude. This got mentioned by so many different interviewees. I heard anecdotes from 2 separate projects that were struggling, which completely turned around when a new staff came on board that embodied a can-do attitude. These projects were failing inspections, they were missing requirements, their targets, their blower door tests were way off. And in one of those cases, the site super wasn't very bought in, right? And for whatever reason, a new site super came and replaced him. And this new one had embodied this can-do attitude. He wasn't pointing fingers. He was there to learn. He was there to problem solve with the rest of the team. And the project all of a sudden started hitting those milestones and eventually gained certification as an example of how that attitude really can carry a project across. And so how do we foster the right attitude? First, it starts with including all the team members on the why of passive building. So these buildings are durable, they're comfortable, they're resilient, healthy, they're energy efficient, they offer great operational cost savings. And we're asking everyone on this project to perform to a higher standard than what they might be used to delivering. Because, for example, airtightness detailing affects all of these goals that I just listed. Second, soliciting feedback and incorporating good ideas is one example. Subcontractors know their trade better than anybody else on the project team. And when we ask them for better, more efficient solutions, they bring fantastic ideas to the table, and they increase, which increases buy-in when their ideas and their contributions are respected. And pride in work is worth mentioning. To feel passion about your work, it must be tied back to your personal values, like buildings that are healthy and don't make us sick, or demonstrating a high skill in one's craft. And as an example, one site super I interviewed relayed how important it was to let trades know when the building achieved final certification, and how the trade's attention to high quality detailing during construction contributed to the project's success. And when that same trade worker who was reluctant on that first project, was not bought into Passive House, showed up on the next job, all of a sudden they were teaching others about effective passive building methods. So outside of attitude, we also need to pay a lot more attention to planning during passive building construction. So passive building, sometimes we say, is not about doing new things, but about doing old things with better planning. First planning stage, of course, is pre-construction. And integrated project delivery is always important, I think, in any big project, but it becomes critical in passive building delivery. And it means that, we're going to see constructability reviews with a GC and key trades. You can hire them in as consultants if needed during early design phases if they're not bought out yet. It means having a project verifier there during design planning to help with, for example, developing midpoint testing strategies and plans when the building is complex. And it means early design charrettes with MEP and structural engineers, because the design and its systems are now interrelated. They're interconnected in a passive building. You can't separate them apart. And it is worth noting that during value engineering, let's make sure to have critical conversations with the developer and the GC about what are those non-negotiable elements for passive building certification. This might require some education for the developer and the GC, especially if they're new to passive building. And let's also include what I call hand-holding contingencies, right? We need to budget for some unexpected learning curves on these projects, especially with teams that are new to passive building delivery. For example, the GC needs to have direct access to be able to pick up the phone and call the verifier, who might be hired by the developer, with questions and not be blocked by fear of change orders or consulting services that ultimately are going to really save the project money to get it right in the first place. during build, integrating passive house concepts and detailing into our meetings. So kickoff meetings are fairly standard, but making sure that when we have these kickoff meetings with trades, that at each phase of construction, we are considering how passive building elements affect the build. These trades need to come together and think through these details and sequencing together in order to ensure better delivery. And then during weekly look-ahead meetings, where typically the trade foreman typically meet in the job trailer with the GC to go over that week's work. Those passive details, again, need to be reviewed. They need to be, the passive elements reiterated because they might have, slipped. It might have been a month since those folks were on site. And the trade foreman then needs to relay this information back to the folks with the actual tools in their hands, the ones doing the work. Many teams are having a passive house specific meeting directly following the OAC meeting too. That's also been a very successful strategy. In terms of training, many trades have never even heard of passive house, and they may not know that they're working on one. They show up to your job site totally unaware, right? This is no fault of their own. This is just a new aspect that we're facing in the industry. And so there are multiple touch point industries, right? Oftentimes there's a requirement for trades. Individual workers need to stop by the job trailer the first day on the job for a safety and logistics training, and they get a sticker for their hard hat that shows that they have an orientation to that particular project, right? So can there be a 5-minute passive house intervention training? This is a passive building. This is why it matters. Don't poke holes in the air barrier. If you do, tell somebody, right? It could be very basic to each person coming to site. And of course, probably a little more in depth for some key trades. And in terms of the overall construction and sequencing, thinking through mockups, we need to protect mockups from value engineering. They can be standalone mockups, they can be on the side of a building. Some projects are using individual apartments that can be used as a proxy for air tightness testing, for example. But the details need to get worked out and the sequencing needs to get worked out before you press play, before you repeat throughout the rest of the project. Okay, so we talked about design planning or pre-certification or pre-construction. We just talked about construction planning, and now let's talk about certification planning. So start planning for certification at project conception. It sounds simple, but there's a few nuances to it. So is your team aware that pre-certification of the design is an option? There might be incentive money on the table in your state. There is, for example, in Massachusetts, for getting the design certified before construction begins. Both Phius and Passive House Institute offer this service. They're there to guide and ensure the design meets qualifications. And then again, let's include some buffers in the energy model where it's possible. So for example, we can shoot for a lower air infiltration rate, but buffer for the limit, making sure that we have a little bit of wiggle room there. And noted that your project might require out of CEQA installation practices than what the industry is used to, and procurement. For example, in podium construction, you might need to air seal the underside of a podium building before fireproofing sprays come in, because sometimes those sprays make it impossible to adequately air seal. So there's going to be some different steps that are required for certification and hitting air tightness targets that are going to need to be incorporated in that planning stage. I added communication to planning because one of the biggest pieces to project success is excellent communication flows. So many people talked about this. Team members need direct channels of communication with each other. The GC needs to access the CPHC or the CPHD, for example. And there are so many non-English speakers on every job site. So generally speaking, site signage and passive trainings are likely going to be in multiple languages. And in many cases, GCs are requiring in their subcontractor agreements that subcontractor foremen speak English, because this role, the foreman role, acts as a critical relay of passive building details to the workers. and highlighting those passive house details, part of planning for sure. We need to be calling out passive house items, not just on the specs, but also where appropriate in the plans or in our subcontracts, using colored drawings with air barrier clearly delineated. That's a common practice now that we're seeing with the foremost passive house architects. If you're working on a PHIUS project, you also need to know that the co-requisite programs like Energy Star and Department of Energy Zero Ready Homes are a big part of project certification. So making sure that your entire team is aware of these critical requirements and putting those checklists for those programs into your subcontracts, putting them into the specs, making sure that they're front and center at those meetings can really help out a lot. And then scheduling. So as far as schedule, making sure to have passive house milestones like midpoint blower door tests, verifier inspections, those are all in there. They're black and white in your schedule, or hopefully a colored schedule, even better. And tying them into the critical path. For example, you can't cover up insulation until your, passive house inspection has happened. Making sure that you don't run into certification issues due to oversights in your scheduling. Okay, so those are kind of the big picture areas of project planning attitude. Right now, we're going to get into the two things that tend to trip up teams the most. The first is air tightness. This is the one that we're probably most familiar with when we're thinking about passive building delivery. Whole building air tightness is one of the defining features of passive house, extremely airtight construction. And despite the tight standards, it can be achieved practically and cost effectively when the team is aligned and has that planning in place. In terms of how to deliver airtightness first and right the first time. So education, we need to probably all step up. If you've had any experience with any type of passive building education, you're probably going to be looked to as an expert on your team. We need to step into that education role, make sure that our trades know what they're doing, make sure that the developers on our teams understand these elements. We're going to be focused on those goals like durability, indoor air quality, etc., but then also a lot on the practical details. And in those practical details, we always say in terms of the design, if left to be detailed in the field, it will be detailed in the field. So we need to make sure that our architectural teams are doing top-notch work to anticipate and get out ahead of problems and difficult areas, especially transition points, any place you have a plane change on a building. And if it's everyone's responsibility, if air tightness is everyone's responsibility, then it is no one's. So making sure we have a clear person in charge who's going to be responsible. That might look different on different projects. It might be each individual trade. You might have an air sealing trade who's responsible in the end. And then really importantly, making sure that we have this role on a passive building project we're often seeing called the air boss. Sometimes we also see it as the air sealing specialist. They get to wear their special ass hat right on the job site. There's different names for this role. You can pick your favorite, but in essence, it is a dedicated passive house specialist on the team that is in charge of details. They're completing QA/QC. They've got robust processes in place. They understand the passive building elements on that particular job. Midpoint testing, air tightness testing is not required, but all projects should be testing for air leakage to some degree. It might look like functional testing where the team is not actually going over a certain air tightness number, perhaps midpoint during construction, but they're doing things like using smoke or fog machines, IR cameras. Perhaps they're doing some window infiltration testing. Maybe they're using an individual apartment unit to be able to test that and make sure that they've got a really robust system in place. They're testing the mock-up in some cases when they're creating a 6-sided mock-up. So including trades in the blower door tests and those inspections, or rather the inspectors, even like the jurisdictional inspectors, is a great educational tool. It helps fix issues more quickly, and you're going to see fewer future mistakes when all of these different rules can see, right? Because there's some visual element to these air tightness testing when they can see the air leakage. And again, during value engineering, making sure to protect midpoint testing, it generally pays for itself. Okay, defining the passive house boundary. What do we mean by that? Certain larger buildings, we might see a commercial space. There might be sections of the building that are carved out. It could be a trash chute or an elevator shaft. It could be an egress stairwell that's on the outside of the building. It could be a community laundry room or community area. There's a lot of different examples of how you might see some origami around, especially the air tightness boundary on these buildings. So one thing that needs to be considered early in design decisions is what is in and what is out of your passive building enclosure. We need to avoid origami when possible, keeping that boundary simple. Air leaks at plane changes and material changes. So that's where you're going to see the most issues with air tightness. And then we actually, Passive House Massachusetts did a whole presentation in June just about this topic. So, Kim will be sharing a link to our website. You can look in our files and watch that if you're interested in some more information about that topic. Window and doors, worth mentioning because we need to get this right before we install hundreds of them. We're going to be puncturing our enclosure with hundreds of holes where we're putting these somewhat susceptible elements. I like my colleague Rob Leonard always says, you get what you inspect, not what you expect. So let's get the detailing around our windows right. Specifically, hinged windows deliver air tightness, sliders don't. Simulated double hung windows can work well for historic areas or if that is the aesthetic that your building is after. Of the few multifamily buildings in Massachusetts in our area that have missed certification, it's because of window air leakage. So this is a place where we need to continue to put critical focus, make sure we've got those details right. So air tightness, is a definitely tripping hazard for a lot of our teams, but so is ventilation. It's the single biggest issue that project teams are having right now in Massachusetts, so it's worth putting some attention on. Early alignment is critical around our ventilation strategy. We need to be inviting, I mentioned this at the top of this presentation, we need to be inviting our MEP, our GC, and our verifiers early to pre-construction meetings into these system design discussions. And if you're doing Phius projects, those Phius co-requisite programs, how well are they understood by all these key players? And then to speak to the energy model again, we heard from a number of verifiers that I interviewed, we need to make sure we're not using the manufacturer data defaults for these ventilation systems. Instead, we need to be applying real world constraints to energy consumption based on our climate, based on the typology of our building, our use case as well. And then clash detection. So we need to make sure that with our ductwork, that clash detection is at the forefront to make sure that we are providing plans to our teams that they can easily follow. Again, when left to be detailed in the field, it will be detailed in the field. We need to make sure that there's room for long, clear runs, reducing bends. And in terms of ductwork, for subcontracts, making sure that our subs are accountable for air tightness in their ductwork. We're going to be holding them to a higher standard. And, considering including as a contingency item, pressurized duct sealing, such as AeroSeal, can really be a good belt and suspenders backup for our teams. And then commissioning. So we just talked about, design, installation, and now let's talk about commissioning of these. We're having issues in Massachusetts with commissioning because a lot of our testing and balancing teams are often a subcontractor to our HVAC. They're not typically aware of or used to passive house level requirements for ventilation delivery. And so making sure we've got good ventilation and direct ventilation, direct communication between our verifier and our testing and balancing teams. And we may need to do some education with them. We may need to be on site, have our verifier there on site the same time that they're starting, so we can calibrate equipment, making sure everybody's on the same page as we're moving forward. And then of note, one thing that is tripping up teams a lot right now is around damper design in Massachusetts. It's important to determine the ventilation strategy up front regarding dampers and get team buy-in. This is especially true for car dampers, which are, it stands for constant airflow regulators, and making sure that whatever type of damper we're using, that they're accessible at the end of the project for troubleshooting, for malfunctions, and making sure that we have whole team clarity on the different damper types. There's going to be different methodologies for testing different types. And similar with buffers in our energy model, if we have, this is especially true for centralized ventilation systems, but if you can't get continuous airflow to meet your targets in, kind of disparate sections of the building, we might need to increase the fan speed, and making sure that our equipment is not already maxed, and making sure that our energy model can allow for a little more wattage if we need to turn up those fans to make sure that we've got good ventilation where we need it. Okay, so in terms of key takeaways, we've got buy-in and the why. There's a lot of cost savings if you design them in. Passive house requires more planning up front. Air tightness and ventilation are the two problems that were mentioned most by interviewees. So learn from your peers, take those opportunities. Don't move on until you've got the green light, you've got the stamp of approval, and expect people to ask you questions. Be prepared to now be the passive house experts on your job. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Alexander, who's going to talk about our education strategy.
Thank you so much, Beth. And we can go to the next slide. I want to really emphasize that practically everything we learned in this research process, Beth said this, was a hard-won lesson, right? Something that didn't go right on a project, some mistake that was made that incurred some cost, some delay. Obviously, there's no such thing as a perfect project. It's not possible to do something as complex, as challenging as building a building, let alone a passive house building, without making some mistakes along the way. But our goal, as much as possible, is to make sure and to help people not make old mistakes and at least make new ones instead. That's our watchword. We have a bunch of educational plans at Passive House Massachusetts that we're excited to be rolling out. We're not going to go through all of them here because we want to get your questions instead. But we encourage you to go and read the report if you want to, which we'll link to in a moment if you want to hear more. You can stay. No, go back. Go back again. There we go. We can just sit here. But before we wrap up, I just want to highlight 3 elements that are particularly high priority, things that we're getting underway as soon as we can. First, we're planning a whole new series of short courses for professionals working on passive house projects. And the idea is not that these are going to take the place of your certifications, your CPHB, D, B, T, any of those letters, but that everyone else on the team who doesn't have those certifications, we want to make sure that we can't give them all the answers in like a 60 to 90 minute class, but we can at least help them understand what the right questions are to ask and get them on the right track. And the first one we're going to roll out based on the information we got in our report is a Passive House 200 for architects. And then we're going to roll them out for other professional roles in the next year or two. The second thing, Beth mentioned this trades training that's sort of missing. We already know that trades are doing terrific work delivering passive buildings. None of them would be built, right, without the trades. But something we've learned is that a lot of people are coming onto site and not getting any consistent support or education about what makes a passive building project different. And we have a lot of ambitious plans to develop more training, especially role-specific training. But before we do that, our immediate task is, as Beth mentioned, to just get really basic, like 5-minute information to everyone coming onto site. Don't penetrate the air barrier. When you penetrate it, who do you talk to? Delivering that in multiple languages, just getting that really critical information to everyone who needs it. And the third thing, we're exploring a whole range of ways to support professionals during a project, looking at site visits and peer support. But our first priority, the thing we really want to do soon that we're developing, is what we're calling early intervention for developers. So as Bev mentioned at the top, we have this giant pipeline in Massachusetts because of the support of Mass CEC and the incentives from Mass Save and the codes here, which means a lot of new teams. And so we want to be reaching out to all the developers who are doing new projects and saying, hey, is this your first time doing it? Do you know about the incentives? Do you know about the resources? What can we do to help and support your teams? Because what we've learned throughout all this research is that when teams start right and get the team together early, get a good team, then they have a much smoother journey. And we can go forward 2 more slides. Now, as I said, there's a whole bunch more we're planning. I just want to flag up that we're having a big symposium at the end of this year on December 9th. I really encourage you to come join us. The theme of this year's symposium, like all of our events next year, is coming out of the messages and lessons of this report, which is that it's possible to raise standards and lower costs at the same time. That you can build better buildings that deliver extraordinary value for only a small premium. We think this is going to be a really exciting event. We encourage you to come join us, especially if you're in the region. And now we've got our last slide here, which is just a link to the report. I encourage you all to come read this, partially because we hope it will be helpful for you, but also because we hope it'll be helpful for us. We really want to hear from you, what you're finding useful, what's missing. We want to improve this and all of our practices. The thing we've learned from this work is that we can only really do this well if we do it together. So we look forward to your input, your support, and that starts now with your questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Alexander. I'm so excited to see some of the education that's going to be rolling out based on this report. It is so helpful, I think, for others working on multifamily projects to see the knowledge of folks who've actually gone through what's been easy, what's been hard. It definitely rings true that one slide that was the 10 top problems is overall air tightness, and then ventilation, all the way down through 10. Like that really rings true. And so much interesting stuff in this report, and that I'm excited for some of these small things too that people can do. So even like people going into the trailer to get their safety training, getting just a little bit extra, like I think that could actually make a huge difference on a lot of projects. So thank you for the time and presenting to this group. And we're looking forward to any questions. If you have questions, drop them into the chat. And we're going to take a quick break for sponsors.
Thank you, Bev. Let me get my screen shared here and drop some links in the chat for everybody. I'm Kim Davis. I manage programming here at Passive House Accelerator, and it's great to have you all with us today. I have a couple events and links to share with you. So starting off with our podcast, we have a episode with Ben Walsham. He is an energy assessment specialist who works on high performance single family homes. And I've also included a link to the PhiusCon recap episode, and you'll see some familiar faces there, but it's a great episode, so be sure to check that one out. Next up, we have a month's theme next month, which is all about retrofits, and we'll be kicking off the month with Kara Haggerty Wilson of Onion Flats. She'll be joining us to speak about deep energy exterior retrofits. Next up, we have a component spotlight event coming up with Rockwall. This is wildland urban interface fires in Canada and the US and applicable solutions. So there's a link in chat to register, and we hope to see you there November 13th. Next up, we have a few community events, including the Building Science Symposium taking place November 5th in Cincinnati, Ohio, International Passive House Open Days taking place globally from November 7th through the 9th, and the Reimagine Buildings Best of Retrofit. This is put on by the Accelerator, and it will be our last conference of the year, 4-hour event, and keep an eye on your inbox for full details on Monday. So we hope to see you there. Over to a few Reimagine Buildings Collective events. We have Fact Club with Shannon Pendleton this evening, all about details, assemblies, and sequencing. We will have Beth Campbell joining us on Friday for an AMA session. And we also have Kevin Brennan joining us next Tuesday for a fireside chat with Michael Ingui, as well as future events with Kara Haggerty Wilson and Ben Bogey. So we hope to see you at those. While we're at it, I'm just going to thank our sponsors really quickly, including our champion sponsors, Bowiso, Cascadia Windows and Doors, European Architectural Supply, Facro, Intelligent Membranes, Icon Windows and Doors, LG, and Source 2050. Our patron sponsors, Building Type, Brennan, Holzraum System, Innotech Windows and Doors, Lamelux, RDH Building Science, and Sanderson Sustainable Design. And finally, our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA. Thank you for your support.
Thanks, Kim. So many events, so much great stuff. Kevin, I see that you had a question. Do you want to ask that to Beth and Alexander?
I am just hunting around for any air sealing details that, especially in the multifamily world, it's always a challenge. So any resources that you guys have, you've obviously had some great successful projects. So any resources you have available would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, that's a great question, Kevin. And I know that that's something that the industry as a whole is eager for. I believe that there are some more recent resources out there, and maybe perhaps if you're listening in the chat and you know of some, you can add them to the chat. I know, for example, that Phius has just released a details library, and I believe that there are some other similar details libraries out there as well. Kevin, if you want to drop a personal email to me, you can, or Alexander will also get this too. It's education@phmass.org, and we can follow up with you after this call, perhaps.
I'll also note, I was actually thinking about the SWA blog post on this, which Lauren Gunter from DeMella Schaefer already posted in the chat.
Oh, great.
Yeah, the community's doing the education for us. This is peer support in action.
Great. Thank you very much.
So don't be shy. If you have a question, feel free to unmute and ask a direct question or drop it in to the chat. In the meantime, maybe I will ask a question. I guess I feel like from what I've heard of this presentation, Beth, there's a lot of great education, especially for certified professionals. It seems like there's a little bit less in the trades that's available right now. Like, would you have like a priority list of things that you think in the trade space would be useful for folks?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, Bevan. I think it a lot of times comes down to regional availability, because trades are likely to want very specific, catered information to their trade. So a lot of that ends up being regional. That being said, I know both Passive House Institute as well as Phius have certified trades professional type trainings that are excellent out there for any trade that especially in enclosures, ventilation, things like that. that want more in-depth training. Here in Massachusetts, what we're seeing with the trades is a lot of site training right now, where GCs and in a lot of cases, consultants or verifiers on site showing up and delivering basically on-demand training for those projects is a lot of what we're seeing right now. So from our perspective, there is a real need that kind of goes in between that 5-minute, here's the gist of what you need to know, versus a more in-depth certification training that we'd like to provide some materials and some support to these projects as they move forward.
I also think we outline in the report, I think we say like particular areas of need HVAC installers, testing and balancing contractors, and then just any trades involved in air sealing are ones. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think ventilation being so hard, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if this is Brian B. Hicks.
Yeah.
Would you like to ask your question?
It's not really a question. Thank you. It's not really a question, but it's a comment. And I've been thinking about this for a long time, from PhiusCon and how Passive House is developed. And I'm, really something like, we're pushing higher quality in the construction industry, right? We're pushing a higher quality product that's more resilient, that results in less waste, hopefully in construction and certainly with energy consumption. So I wanted to take a step back and away from being an architect in the CPHC. My training also is in project management from UC Berkeley, and I have my PMP from Project Management Institute. And I just wanted to sort of take a step back and broaden some thoughts here. When you look at the quality management industry and project management sector, there's a big guru called Dr. Deming. He was very seminal in the 70s and the 80s and teaching the Japanese actually about quality from a quality control, reducing errors, reducing waste perspective. So I know everybody's swamped, but if anybody has any sort of free time to look at quality management and how to think about Passive House in terms of increased quality, he's written many books. You can find out about him on projectmanagementinstitute.org, as well as just Google Dr. Deming, Edward Deming. There's also a Baldrige Award by a national performance organization. I forget the name, but they sort of dovetail into Deming they give awards to companies and organizations that focus on quality performance, reducing waste, resilience. And I just sort of see, something that it'd be great for, I don't know, a firm or a contract or a project to really submit and apply for the Baldrige Award to demonstrate excellence in the construction industry. And then another great book out there on project management and project excellence is a recent book from 2023 called How Big Things Get Done. It's by a Danish researcher on why some big projects fail, some big projects win or succeed. And I bring this up because I come from the corporate real estate industry, CBRE, and CBRE, their project management group sort of really focuses on this book as a great read for their staff. So, taking a step back, look at the broader picture and not really change how anything here is being presented or said, but maybe from a marketing perspective, as we connect with our clients, maybe more commercial clients, how we can dovetail some of those themes that we're touching upon with those other sectors to, make new connections. I think with Deming, take a step back with Deming, his big focus was on reduced waste. And I think to Kim's point about the subcontractors being really seminal and key to project success and bringing information in, that's what he was really key about Japanese management, is that those on the front line building things are the most key to delivering a great product. Not those at the top, but those in the front line. And there's some other real great thoughts that I see in this presentation that I immediately think of, anyway, Dr. Deming and his tenets. It's a great.
Sounds like there's a lot of echoes of some of the things that Beth found in her research in that project management and quality management.
And that
work.
would be
That's-
great to drop some of those resources into the chat, like what you were.
I will do it right now. I will do it right now. But just it's more from like a marketing perspective, and because like telecommunications companies or software companies, they think with these concepts, and I'm always trying to like get the design architecture communities to find new ways to connect with clients on themes that they talk about that maybe we don't. So
I think this is a great point. And I know Demi had a huge influence on shipbuilding in Japan, and that work diffused out into the construction industry in Japan. And so the only thing I push back on with what you said is I think it's not just for marketing. I think there are things that we can learn from how other industries have done this in the same way that there was diffusion from shipbuilding to construction there.
yeah.
I think there's room for that same sort of cross-sector learning that we haven't done enough of, and we should look into. And I think
And it's not just Japan, because I think Motorola was really a key American company that sort of jumped on his quality bandwagon. So
Yeah.
he's had influence across many companies and cultures and industries. Anyway,
Thank you.
I'll put that in. Thank you.
So I see, William, you have a comment. I don't know if you want to say more about your comment.
It was just, simple observation. I thought it would be good to have somebody on the on site on the case of thermal bridging, just like you have.
Yeah, so not just an air boss, but somebody who's like the main central person thinking about thermal bridging.
Yes, like around your window and door penetrations.
Great, you come up with a catchy title for that, and we'll implement it.
That's our job. We've got a question queue here, right? It's Catherine, Jess, Thea.
Should I unmute? I guess so. So it's my first time here. I really appreciate the attention. I think the key, the philosophical approach, with Passive House compared to most others like LEED or, is the inspection versus expectation. So that involvement is so critical. So thank you for that. And then, so as I guess a millennial, I'm also, because I don't have access to on-site or construction, I'm usually dreaming up crazy things behind the desk sometimes. But a flip book, maybe, is there like a do's and corrections of the air sealants? I'm assuming that they're mostly, or most critical points are at the fenestrations and windows. I mean, it's not by project, right? I mean, I wouldn't expect any legal implications, but yeah, I would just love to see examples of, things like this.
I have seen some of those come out with individual GCs that we've been working with who have, multiple projects under their belt now. I think it's a great idea. Any type of visual representation that we can have. I don't know of any kind of industry standard one that's getting shared currently, but I applaud the individual or group that makes it, because I think other people would really benefit as well.
Yeah, I would say, like, I've definitely seen certain architects talk about like the first try they saw the electrician do on this, and then what they had to change it to, right? And the first try on the plumbing, sealing around the plumbing. So like, I'm thinking like Michelle Apigian, a number of her presentations, I feel like she's been very free showing, she doesn't say which GC or which subs, but and honestly, she's often holding up the craft of it, because I think what her main message is a lot of times is you teach people to do it the better way. They don't tend to go back. And they take pride in their work. They want to do good work. They just don't always know what the goal is. Like, they've done things a certain way and they don't necessarily know what the goal is. So yeah, Michelle Apigian from Icon, I think she's presented here a bunch of times on Passive House Accelerator. But I think it's a good idea, like, Beth, like, we should think about that, because I think,
I mean, it could be like an open forum, and, to make sure that we have our contracts and legal language properly, so it's just a side-by-side example. So it's collective learning rather than, you know what I mean? So thank you.
Sure, it's like a makeover, you see the before and the after.
Yeah.
And we have to collect photos and things for our resources anyway, so maybe we can like make those more open source in some way. Yeah,
It's a good
add
idea.
that to our list. Yeah, that's a good idea. Jess wanted us to read her question. Would someone else like to read it, or should I read it?
Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm endlessly passionate about passive house and can no longer not be involved in this critical building science. I'm a self-taught designer that's looking to find my place. My dream is to bring the first passive house retrofit to your town, which is great. So I want to know if her town's in Massachusetts or not, and she'd like to hear some suggestions from the panelists. I mean, I'll just say one first thing is to find out who the passive house community is locally, right? So if you're in Massachusetts, you found us. We're here. You should email us at Alexander or Beth at phmass.org. But like more broadly, I think many parts of the country now have, even if not like in your town, like some kind of regional organization, either like a Phius Alliance chapter, a Passive House Network chapter, or an independent one like us. I mean, Passive House Accelerator is also a great resource nationally. Obviously, you found your way here, but I would say find that local community, and they can probably steer you right. I don't know if Beth, you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, well, you took the words out of my mouth. That's the best place to start.
Staten Island, she says, there's zero passive house industry. So there might not be any passive house in Staten Island, but there definitely is in New York. So like New York Passive House. There's also Passive House Empire State is, I think, the PHN chapter. There's also, I don't know if there's a Phius Alliance chapter. There's definitely New York ones. And we're if you just get in touch with us, we can direct you to them. Or
there's a ton happening in New York State, so you're lucky, Jess. You probably
no shortage in New York State. I'm sure they'd be excited to bring it to Staten Island. Yeah.
And I see Thea has a question. Do you want to unmute?
Yeah. Hi. Yes. First of all, such a great presentation. I can't wait to implement some of that for our first project. And then my question is more focused on energy modeling because I am an energy modeler on our team. And I think Beth mentioned about, how you, when you model, you account for some of the real life constraint when modeling ventilations, not just on the spec. So I'm just curious if you have any example to expand more on that.
It's a great question. And, energy modeling is not my background, so I'm going to defer to others that know a lot more about this. I have been reporting what I've been hearing. And so from those experienced energy modelers, one example is that on a multifamily building where you have a centralized ventilation system, so your ventilation is being run by likely just one or maybe just a few ERVs, that if the equipment is designed to its maximum, that if you for some reason need to turn up the ventilation in order to, because you just don't have because these are low flow systems, if you're not meeting those ventilation minimums in some of those units, that you may need to turn up the entire ventilation system. And if you don't have that room built into your energy model, especially for the wattage, for the extra electric usage, that it can, throw you out of certification. So having some buffers there is one example. But, what we'd like to be able to do is probably put you in touch with other people who know more and who have lived experience in that realm. So feel free to reach out.
Sounds good. That was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, I've heard that a lot too, is if it's not the ventilation, it's somewhere else that you're going to need the room. So like, don't cut it too close. Like everybody will be much happier with you later.
I think Carl is next. Carl Eklund.
Yeah. This is Carl. Hello?
Hi.
Carl, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Fire away your question.
I've had a lot of trouble trying to get to passive house sites and opening them up so that you can get information. I'm building my own house by myself, And I've gotten nowhere with any passive house sites, except one time I was able to get something that said what kind of R value or U value are required on my windows here in California. Is there a site that actually just doesn't say how wonderful they are, but actually gives out information like how to, build? I'm building my house, so I need to take care of the air coming through the floor, etc. Is there anywhere I can go here in California, or I mean, a website I can go anywhere? The only people who I've been able to contact and do anything is Passive House Accelerator.
Do you know which standard are you building to, Phius or PHI?
No, I don't really know that yet. Okay.
Okay.
I've designed, and I'm building my own house. I'm trying to find out what kind of parameters I need to build to. I've got I'm at structural inspection right now. I'm getting close to putting the windows in. I need a little help.
Yeah.
Got it. Carl, it sounds like what you're looking for somewhat specific information to your climate and to your project. So what I'm going to recommend is we'd be happy to share some resources with you. If you want to reach out to our email, we can send you in the right direction and hopefully get you on a better pathway than what you've been able to find so far. Does that work for you?
That would work. So you're going to send me an email, or how do I get a hold of your email?
Yep, just look in the chat and you can see education@phmass.org. That'll go to me and we can send you an email
Great.
with more information.
And also the advice I was giving earlier about like finding a local chapter. So there's for the PHI side, it's Passive House California. And I know that for the Phius side, the region is the Pacific region, which covers California. Maybe I saw Isaac in the chat can drop the name of the Phius Alliance chapter that's most relevant. But yeah, I would say talking to them, they'll have that local thing. We can help you if you email us. But that's generally a great way to get region specific advice. I didn't see anyone else in the queue. I saw some more questions just in the chat. Or are we skipping over anyone if we take those?
Looks like we have Alex up next,
Yeah.
and then we have Carol.
Alex asked in the chat, could you speak to the value of any automated systems that seal ducts or whole envelopes?
I haven't heard of any automated systems. I know that there's a few different tactics that teams are using. Some projects are looking toward offsite manufacturing to help with that, basically taking quality management out of the field and putting it into a factory where you've got more contained conditions. Some folks are going that way. And then in terms of actual strategies for both ventilation and whole building air tightness, some folks are using pressurized sealing, such as AeroSeal or AeroBarrier, or a couple of different brands. Most teams are using that as an additional kind of belt and suspenders method rather than a primary method. But I guess I would need clarifications on a little more depth of your question if I didn't hit it with those answers.
And then we've got Carol's question. Is there an intersection, unless Carol wants to ask it herself? Is there an intersection between passive house building and modular offsite construction? Which I think I'm pretty comfortable saying yes, there is an intersection. We got some exciting things going on at that. People were presenting at PhiusCon. In Massachusetts, we've got there's panelized modular project at Bunker Hill. People are experimenting both with panelized modular and volumetric modular offsite construction. So it definitely can be done, and we're seeing exciting innovation in that space.
And there's a number of offsite manufacturing companies dedicated to doing passive house delivery too.
Yeah. People have put some good stuff in the chat in response to some of the questions that people should look at. So a note from Isaac that the Cascadia PhiusCon's Cascadia covers the Pacific region and thus California. So that's helpful. And also an advice, which I think is always good for any passive house project from Stu, which is to hire a consultant. That someone having like a specialized passive house advisors is a good idea. Yeah, have we answered the questions here? Is there anything?
Yep, we answered the last question in the queue.
There we go. There it is.
There's a lot more information in the report. Download that, take a peek. And we're happy to support you in other ways. Just reach out anytime. We're friendly.
Thank you, Beth, Alexander, and Bev. I have, just to remind folks, if you'd like to continue the conversation, Beth will be joining us on the Reimagine Buildings Collective this Friday. I'm going to drop a link in chat for you there. And then our 101 next month to kick off Retrofit Month will be next Wednesday at noon. So thank you, everyone. And we look forward to next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, you guys.
Bye.